On this morning, Abe went for a walk around Macomb with his friend James K. McGee. His friend insisted Mr. Lincoln get a photograph image taken of him, an embryotype, at T.P. Pearson's studio near the Hotel Randolph House. When he sat in front of the modern camera contraption, Lincoln was reported to have asked, quote, "Well, do you want to take a shot at me with that thing?" unquote. He was then handed a mirror so that he could, quote, "fix up," unquote. But he declined, saying it would not be much of a likeness if I fixed up any. Abraham was famous for his rather casual manner of dress and unruly shock of dark hair. Lincoln then checked out of the Randolph House and ultimately was bound for Freeport, Illinois. But the committee stopped him at Mendota for the night, which in total was about 155 railroad miles. He boarded the CB&Q train in Macomb, passing through Galesburg, Kewanee, Princeton, and then on to Mendota. That's where he would spend the night. And on that night, and on that day that he arrived, because of that photograph that was taken, that was exactly the way he looked at that time. It is in this book here, An Oral History of Abraham Lincoln by John G. Nicolay, and this is his interviews and essays. And this book here talks about Lincoln's overnight stay at the Passenger House in Mendota, Illinois on August 26, 1858. On page 44, it talks about the conversation with Honorable Norman B. Judd in Washington, D.C. on February 28, 1876. Here's what it says. I carried to Douglas Lincoln's challenge to the great debate. Lincoln came to my office in Chicago and asked my opinion about tendering Douglas a challenge of that kind. While he asked my advice, he did it in such a way that, as I knew him so well, I saw that he had already decided the question for himself. I therefore, without hesitation, told him I thought it would be a good thing. He then sat down in my office and wrote that note. After I got the note, I had very hard work to find Douglas. I hunted him down for 3 days before I got a chance to present it to him. When I did so, finally, it made him very angry, so much so that he almost insulted me. Quote, "What do you come to me with such a thing as this for?" unquote, he asked, and indulged in other equally ill-tempered remarks. Lincoln had meanwhile gone back to Springfield, etc. When Lincoln was going up to make his Freeport speech, Lincoln telegraphed to Ebenezer Peck and myself to meet him at Freeport. When we got there the evening before, we found that the committee had stopped him on his way out at Mendota, and then bring him in the next morning with the procession, etc., etc. So we took the night train and went out to Mendota to meet him. We got there about 2 o'clock at night, and we had Lincoln waked right up. We went up into his bedroom and had our talk with him there. He looked very comical sitting there on one side of the bed in his short nightshirt, etc., etc. He then read to us his answers to Douglas's Ottawa questions. Now you remember they were concerning the fugitive slave law and the abolition of slavery in the District of Columbia, etc. As we were up there in northern Illinois, where the anti-slavery sentiment was very strong, I insisted upon a slight change of the phraseology, not to make any material difference of the sense, but to make his declarations a little more palatable to the Republicans of that section. But I couldn't stir him. He listened very patiently to both Ebenezer Peck and myself, but he wouldn't budge an inch from his well-studied formulas. He then said, "Well, now, gentlemen, that is all. I wouldn't tomorrow mislead any gentleman in that audience to be made President of the United States," unquote. We went on down with him in the morning to catch the train, and he read his replies just as he had framed them himself, and as he had showed them to us. And another source called Mr. Lincoln and Friends. There's a letter here intended for Ebenezer Peck, written by Lincoln, and it says the following. Quote, "I have just written Norman Judd that I wish him and you to meet me at Freeport next Friday to give me the benefit of a consultation with you," unquote. And that was a letter to Ebenezer Peck, a Republican political leader and Chicago lawyer, written in August 1858. Lincoln went on further to say, he said, "Senator Stephen Douglas is propounding questions to me which perhaps it is not quite safe to wholly disregard. I have my view of the means to dispose of them, but I also want yours and Judd's opinion. I have written more at length to Judd, and would to you, but for lack of time, see Judd. You and him keep the matters to yourselves, and meet me at Freeport without fail," unquote. The two Chicago Republican leaders, quote, "took the night train and went out to Mendota to meet him," Judd recalled. In this book, The Lincoln-Douglas Debates, it mentions Lincoln had arrived in Freeport the morning of the debate. Here's what it says on page 87. It says, "Lincoln arrived in Freeport the morning of the debate aboard a special train filled with his supporters. The crowd of enthusiasts who met him at the depot, quote, roared themselves hoarse on his appearance," unquote. An eyewitness remembered greeting him with a booming cannon salute before escorting him into town. The last I saw of Chabonneau was in Mendota in 1858. He was then on a farewell visit to his white friends in northern Illinois from Ottawa to Mendota, stayed one night with Big Axe, Levy Kelsey, then to Dixon, Illinois, to stay a moon with old Mr. Dixon, thence to Malagras Grove, 1 week with John K. Robeson, from there to Prophetstown, toward the Mississippi. He was a chief of the Potawatomi Indians, was of the Ottawa tribe, born on the Ottawa River in Canada, and died near Seneca in Grundy County, Illinois, in 1859. In the weekly press, a Mendota newspaper, in the week of July 16, 1858, Friday, page 2, this was said about Senator Douglas. He was here on Tuesday morning on his way to Clinton, DeWitt County, where he had an engagement to speak in the afternoon. He was surrounded by the faithful as well as many Republicans who had some curiosity to see the little giant. Grant in Mendota. General Grant and party passed through Mendota last Tuesday, but as we had already given him one big reception, no public demonstration was made. The party partook of an excellent dinner at the Passenger House, and were only required to shake hands with a few persons before departing. Mr. Fred Douglass, Washington, D.C., registered at the Passenger House Wednesday night. He was en route from Elgin and from there to Chicago. Time has dealt greatly with Fred, and he is good for many years of service yet. The citizens of Mendota were favored with a short visit from Theodore Tilton on Sunday. He came from Amboy in a private conveyance and registered at the Passenger House. He attended the M.E. Church in the evening and departed for further engagements on the westbound express the same night. We passed a pleasant day recently in the charming village of Mendota. We found Ike Rogers attending to the wants of the public in the Passenger House at the junction of the CB&Q and IC railways, and everything about the institution denoted that times were good and business prosperous. The Passenger House is now in better hands than ever before, and traveling men call it the best hotel between Chicago and Quincy. Mendota is a pretty place. The majority of its inhabitants are well fixed, and many of them are wealthy. Its society is excellent, and in two things at least the place makes us think of Lexington, Kentucky. It is filled to overflowing with fast horses and pretty women. There passed through this city last Wednesday evening over the CB&Q Railroad for San Antonio, Texas, about 400 U.S. regular soldiers under the command of Major Bush. They stopped here for supper. The officers and their wives filled up on bone turkey and sitch, but the boys knocked the worms from their hardtack and swallowed it with a cup of coffee, of which the Passenger House furnished 2 barrels. Charlie Taylor of the Passenger House has purchased a new cooking range from Chicago. It is very large and cost about $400. The Passenger House stables in Mendota. The price has been reduced for this year from $50 to $25 in order to induce farmers in this vicinity to breed a better class of horses. Terms: $25 for the season, payable in advance. There are several gentlemen in the city who, having visited the club dances given at the Passenger House this winter, are probably not aware of their indebtedness to the managers in the sum of $1 each. Charlie Taylor of the Passenger House is doing the boss slaying of the season on our streets. Lady Star, with her enviable record of 2 minutes and 24 seconds, goes before the cutter. Dr. P.J. Koss, electric and magnetic physician, will give a free lecture at Washington Hall, Mendota, on Monday evening, August 14th. Dr. Koss will exhibit his magnetic garments during his lecture. Attend and learn the marvelous healing power of magnetism for all chronic complaints. Dr. Koss will be at the Passenger House the 15th and 16th for free consultation and the free examination of his magnetic garments. New Railroad Hotel. We are reliably informed that a new railroad passenger house and hotel is to be erected in this city early the coming spring to accommodate the increasing business at this point. The new buildings, we understand, are to be located between the tracks of the Illinois Central and CB&Q railroads about 1 block north of the present passenger house, near where West's elevator now stands, and are to be commenced as soon in the spring as the season will permit. Gilmore's famous band, composed of 50 members, take dinner at the Passenger House today. They are on their way to California. We are pleased to note the fact that Mr. Billy Crenshaw, for a long time head clerk of the Passenger House, has accepted an offer to fill the position of head clerk of the Tremont House in Aurora. Mr. Crenshaw made many friends while in Mendota, and he leaves with the good wishes of all. One of the main crossings between Main Street and the passenger depot is now covered with snow and ice to a depth of about 1 foot. Let's have the streetmen remove this nuisance. No charge for consultation. Call at the doctor's rooms, number 18, Passenger House. See advertisement in another column. Dr. Knapp, formerly of New York, who has visited Mendota regularly the past year and effected many wonderful cures of oid, chronic diseases, cancers, and diseases of the eye and ear, which have been pronounced incurable by the medical profession generally, can be consulted at the Passenger House Thursday, September 21st, as will be seen by his card in another column. Consultation free. We are happy to announce the arrival at the Passenger House, Mendota, of Dr. William C. McDermott, oculist, optician, etc. of Chicago, Illinois. The doctor can be consulted on all of those diseases of the eye or ear that have baffled the skill of our best Western oculist. He comes with the best testimonials of extraordinary skill from the most respected gentlemen of Aurora, Oswego, and the city of Chicago. See his advertisement. On last Thursday, a royal party of 37 Japanese en route from California to Washington City passed this city on the CB&Q Express, and the party stopped for dinner at the Passenger House, where they attracted considerable attention. Prince Mitsufushimi, uncle of the reigning emperor, headed the party, all of whom are sons of nobles and high officials in Japan. Ingoi Ariane, Mori Minister, Plenipotentiary, and Ambassador to the United States, Anne Sweet, and Mr. Charles Wolcott Brooks, Consul of Japan in California, accompanied the party. The Japs were all dressed in European style. Accident. Broken leg. On Friday night of last week, quite an excitement was raised in town by the hearing of loud cries in the yard of the Burlington Road. The cries were repeated until someone thought it was a fire and gave the alarm. People rushed to the Passenger House, thinking to find it in a blaze. We followed the crowd, but finding no fire and seeing a number of lanterns at the lower end of the coal chutes, started in that direction, and met some men coming down bearing on a board the lacerated body of a fine-looking young man who had had both legs fractured by being run over by a freight train while engaged in coupling cars. He was a brakeman on Joe Forrest's train, his name being Thomas Brown, and his residence Galesburg. He was taken to the passenger house where every attention was paid to him, and he was made as comfortable as his mangled condition would permit. Dr. Cook has charge of the case and is giving it close attention. We understand that the young man's mother and aunt are here, and nothing will be left undone to effect his recovery. The fractures are very bad, both legs being broken at the thighs, the right leg in 2 places, the left in 1. Too much praise cannot be given to the management of the CB&Q Railroad for the manner in which they have taken care of their employee, Thomas Brown, who was so severely injured week before last at this place. They have furnished the best medical attendance in their power, have employed nurses, paid the expenses of his relatives, and in every way contributed to his recovery, which we are glad to report is now almost certain. The passenger house folks also deserve much praise for the care and attention they have bestowed. Tommy fell into good hands, and we hope he may be able to resume duty and receive promotion till he handles the punch on a passenger train. Mendota News, Book and Job Printing and Binding, Establishment, Main Street opposite of the passenger house. The following is an obituary for James Aiken in the Chicago Inner Ocean, May 8, 1879. Mr. Aiken ran the passenger house from 1856 to 1873. A picture of his stone in the Mendota Cemetery follows. Mendota, Illinois, May 7th. The remains of Mr. James Aiken, who for many years was proprietor of the passenger house in this city, were brought here today for interment, the CB&Q Railroad furnishing a special car. A very large congregation was in waiting, and one of the largest funeral processions we have had here for years followed the remains of an old and much esteemed citizen to the cemetery. Mr. Aiken was 70 years old and had resided for the past 6 years at 1102 Prairie Avenue, Chicago. Conflagration. Yesterday morning, about 2:30, the CB&Q baggage room, during the temporary absence of the baggage man, took fire through the explosion of a lamp. The whole room was soon ablaze. An alarm was sounded, and as much as there is of our present fire department responded promptly, but owing to the fact that no water could be obtained until after 4 o'clock, nothing could be done, and the fire, which could have been easily checked in the start, spread rapidly, consuming the baggage and telegraph offices. The express office was saved by hard work, people throwing water onto it by the pailfuls. It is said that the hydrants were frozen, but this is denied on the other hand. The whole trouble seems to be that there was no water in the pipes and no pressure to force it into them. Parties bursted the door of the CB&Q pump works but could not manage the engine, and it took over an hour to get the engineer, Ed Wright, who lives nearly a mile away. By the time the water was obtained, the fire had consumed the kitchen of the passenger house and was making rapid headway in the hotel. The people in the house had plenty of time to save themselves. Colonel Taylor, who was on the sickbed, had to be carried out and taken to Ed Lowry's rooms, where he is now quite comfortable. The temperature was exceedingly low, 16 below zero, and the men working the hose had a terrible time of it, as water would freeze onto them in an instant, covering them with a crust of ice. It was impossible to save the passenger house, and in the morning it was only a mass of smoldering ruins. Ticket agent Watkins has a temporary office in the express building, where will also be the waiting room until better quarter can be provided. The loss on the hotel building is estimated at $25,000. Colonel Taylor's loss in furniture and fixtures is about $8,000, with an insurance of $3,000 with Madden and Goetner and the London, Livingston, and Globe. One thing has been demonstrated beyond a doubt, that our city is no more protected against fire than it ever has been. Our fire department is wholly disorganized at present, and the water supply in case of a fire is an unknown quantity, dependent upon a number of contingencies. The reporter was correct when it asserted last year that the last word has not been spoken on the water question, that to rely upon a railroad company for our supply of water in case of a fire would prove to be a mighty uncertain thing. Yesterday's fire has demonstrated beyond a doubt the utter insufficiency of the arrangement for protection against fire made last year. Nothing short of waterworks will do. Let the citizens agitate the question right now before our next city election, and support only men who are in favor of protecting the city by the speedy erection of waterworks. In the Ottawa Republican, published February 27, 1885, the Mendota Bulletin had this in their paper: "The dearly bought lesson taught by the fire last night is that our extensive and expensive system of waterworks, costing thousands of dollars, are next to worthless unless some better arrangements can be made for getting more promptly the necessary pressure to force the water through the hydrants. The council were strongly urged to make an arrangement by which the tank engineer could live near the tank, so as to keep a banked fire under the engine and be ready to turn the pressure of the steam engine on the mains at a few moments' notice, as he proposed to do for a nominal consideration last fall. But they failed to accept his offer, and the first result is an unnecessary loss of $30,000 or $40,000. Will the council now proceed to devise some plan to make our waterworks available for use when needed?" The Mendota Bulletin. In the Amboy News, on February 21, 1885, it said this: "The IC passenger house at Mendota burned sometime Thursday night. There has been some considerable contention about the possession of the house for some time, It would now seem to be settled for a time at least. The Passenger House. The Passenger House, the oldest landmark of Mendota, and one which figured most conspicuously in its early history, has gone down. It was, not counting a few shanties, the first building erected, and a right royal building it must have been at the time. The Illinois Central reached this point in the summer of 1853, and entered upon the erection of a substantial depot and hotel at once. The freight house was built about the same time. The building was completed during the winter and occupied by a Mr. Pelton the following spring. It formed the nucleus around which a thriving village began to form rapidly, settlers pouring in from all directions, especially after the Aurora extension, which later developed into the CB&Q. Reached the new town in October 1853. The place was then a scene of most active life. The Illinois Central had come to a standstill for a time on account of the deep cuts necessary on its route north, and the whole country north was tributary to it. People coming even from Dixon, Grand Detour, Sterling, and other settlements that had no railroad connection with Chicago to this point to ship their stock and grain. The town experienced a great boom, and many predicted for its growth like that of Chicago. Property sold at higher figures than at the present day. Business was flourishing, and houses of all descriptions grew up like mushrooms, among the first being a store built by D.D. Giles, who arrived here in March 1853 from New York State, having traveled the whole distance by team. The people were very social, and the Giles, Kelseys, Wests, Teeds, Andrus, Gilmans, Otts, and others enjoyed life for all that it was worth. Dances were held frequently in the upper story of the Illinois Central Freight House, and over the new store erected by Giles and Wells in 1855. Mendota was a moral town, even though Schick kept a corner grocery in the street opposite the hotel, and religious services were conducted in the Passenger House by John West before any churches had been built. The hotel was leased by James Aiken about 2 years after its completion, who built an addition of 30 feet at the north end. During his tenancy, and especially during the war, the hotel saw its palmiest days and resounded with the din of gay festivities, fancy dress parties, and balls. Travelers would come from near and far to spend Sunday, and mayhap go fishing in the large puddle east of the hotel. Aiken left a rich man to enter upon more extensive fields of labor, though with ill success. He died a pauper, having lost his fortune made at the Mendota Passenger House in railroad speculations. The hotel was then leased by Colonel Taylor, who has conducted it ably until the fatal hour. His lease would have expired next May. The house had grown rickety and weary through the many years it had shared the prosperous and adverse fortunes of the town it had nursed into life, and made way for new and more commodious buildings to spring from its ashes, like the fabled phoenix of old. The Passenger House had its well-landscaped grounds, all neatly fenced in, and beautiful gardens. Martin Purcell was the gardener. Purcell had at one time been coachman for General Andrew Jackson. J.P. Broisius was the hotel barber. His barber chair was a gift from friends. It was plush-covered and is said to have cost $60. Mr. Aiken sold out his interest in the Passenger House in 1872 to Charles Taylor. He was a son of Colonel Taylor of LaSalle, a man prominent in Illinois history. Taylor's regime was eminent. Standing on one of the mantels of the hotel was a handsome gold anniversary clock, the gift, it is said, of Potter Palmer of Chicago. The passenger house of the 70s and 80s was the scene of many parties and gatherings. It was elaborately furnished and saw many distinguished guests in its dining room and parlors. There still exists in Mendota one of a pair of long mirrors framed in rosewood that hung in the parlor of this hotel. When the fire was discovered that razed the famous hotel, these mirrors were rescued from the flames. Built to replace this hotel was a new and fabulous new railroad station and depot hotel, which was said to have been the largest between Chicago and Omaha. The depot hotel had many rooms, a large dining room, and a lunch counter. The structure, with the wings that housed railroad baggage rooms and the like, occupied a large part of an entire block. When the new Union Depot Hotel was completed, an elaborate opening banquet and ball was held on February 23, 1888. This brick here is one we found deep underground in the area of the Illinois Central Passenger House. And as you can see on the outside, it's a lighter color. There was some type of coating. On the inside, there's a red brick color. And on this side here, you can tell that there's a burn mark from the passenger house fire in 1885 on February 20th, 2 a.m. And here's another brick. This one is almost entirely intact. Some good signs of the fire there. The black hair. And on this side here, it was coated with some sort of a glazing, and you can see it shine there, and it looks to be off at this point. And this is the mortar side, and there's the inside of the brick, but you can see that glazing there, whatever that is, and then you can see the burned brick here. It was always my guesstimation that the original color of the passenger house was this cream colored, kind of like what I have here. I painted that, or colorized it, and I did end up painting a picture of that, which I'll show you. But Abe Lincoln did stay in the passenger house. But as I'm looking at this color, the more I'm convinced that this was the outside, of course, and you can see remnants of the mortar on top and the bottom and on this side. So I think that the outside surface of the passenger house was coated with some sort of I don't know, clear coating, possibly with a paint or something. You know, that's my best guess. We found this right where, basically toward the center of the passenger house, when we dug down 3 foot deep for the Illinois or the Milwaukee Road crossbuck sign out by the steam engine. Here is a good sample of a layer on the outside of the brick that is light colored, and you can see right here how it's chipped, and you can also see the glaze, especially on this side. You see that glazing that was put on this brick. All of this brick provide clues more here. Let's see here. Yeah, there's some more glazing there, and once again it provides clues as to an outer layer. All of this brick here. Let's see here what his has on it. There's a little piece there, but see, it's got like a light color to it. And then here is a good sample here of that light color on the outside. See that layer right there? And then this is the mortar here on this side, I am guessing. This was a corner of a brick. Clues. Here is quite a few of the stones that we retrieved from the trench and some of the brick. The express office is in the site of exactly where our gate tower is. And we're still lucky to have the old Illinois Central freight house. And if we walk this way Over here was where the telegraph office was, and it is almost in line with the north end of the old IC freight house. As a matter of fact, it'd be in this area right here, and this is where the trencher had a hard time getting through some of the stone. And then I have it marked here that this was the Illinois Central Telegraph Office in this site here. Like I say, if you're right across from the Illinois Central Freight House, which is now a fine Mexican restaurant, then you are in the site of the telegraph office. And over here was a baggage room shed, I think, or a shed of some sort. And then we have the passenger house was in this area here. I will show you the southwest corner of the passenger house here, if I can get out of my own shadow. So it's right there, and I would be standing right on the corner of that. Right where my head is at is the southwest corner of the passenger house. So there's our steam engine, of course, Illinois tracks, Illinois Central tracks right here to the left. This is the old main line, then the Burlington over there. Now, the length of the passenger house was 125 feet, so almost in line with the cab of the 4978, more so the whistle. And then it was 40 feet that way. So if I walk over here, I will find the southeast corner of the old passenger house, and then the other markers are near the steam engine. Just to the right of the 4978 is the northeast corner, and then to the left of that, across from the whistle of the steam locomotive close to the cab, is the northwest corner. Let me also add that just south of the express office, which is where our gate tower is today, was a water tank, railroad water tank for the Illinois Central. So about in this area here. And then we have 6th Street. And then across 6th Street was a flagman's house. So before there was a tower there, interlocking tower, there was a flagman's house that guarded the crossing of the Illinois Central and the Chicago and Aurora in the very first few years, which became the CB&Q. And this, folks, is according to the Sanborn fire maps of 1885, which shows the ruined foundation of the passenger house. So all of these buildings that were in this area, the passenger house by the steam engine, then a baggage shed, it says, and then the telegraph office of the Illinois Central, and then the express office, which was saved during the fire. It was one of the few saved. The rest of the buildings burned. And then we had the water tank here, and who knows if that water tank had something to do with the water supply that they were trying to put out the fire with. So if we're tracing the old steps of Abraham Lincoln on August 26th, 1858, he came on the CB&Q Railroad, crossing the Illinois Central over in the distance about a block. And he came on this line here, and he would have gotten off the train about in this area, pretty close to across from the steam engine. And he would have went inside the passenger house, which was in this area. And in the morning, after staying the night, as I mentioned about the story, after he spent the night here with the committee and his advisors, Judd and Peck, he would have gotten on the train just over here. A special Illinois Central train awaited him right here on this very track. And he probably got on board just within this vicinity on the platform. The platform would have been just inside and close to this fence here. Well, from the rail here to about there was the platform. And then the passenger house was all up in this area here. And if you're standing about right here, this is where the center of the old Illinois Central passenger house would have been.